Well, Ali, thank you so much to come back yet again to the Entrepreneurial Success Podcast. I am so excited to have you here for numerous reasons, because the previous episode we did was episode 93, where we spoke about, are you aligned with your values? And today we're going to take that a step further. And I am so thrilled to talk about this, in addition to some other things, which we'll get into. But before we get going with all the good stuff, why don't I hand over to you so you can introduce yourself to the audience again and tell us who you are and what you do.
Hello, and thank you for having me again for this second time. I'm so happy to be back. My name is Ali Dunn. I am a mindset, leadership, and Enneagram coach based in the San Francisco Bay Area in California. And I primarily work with female entrepreneurs as well as career professionals, founders, really for the most part, women who are either in transition, they want to up-level their business. Maybe they've reached a point in their life where they've checked all the boxes and they're not sure what's next. So my role is really to see a higher vision for my clients and help them kind of step into their power, align themselves with their values, and live a life that is full of meaning and that they can wake up in the morning and be excited about their day. And another part of my business that's new since we last spoke is I do some team building work using the Enneagram, which is a personality system that I use with clients, both one-on-one and in the team space. But I'm very passionate about communication and the way we talk to each other and about how we can learn from each other's perspectives. And I think when work feels good, we can feel good at home as well.
Yes, absolutely. And this is the thing that excites me, because we are going to talk about the Enneagram, what it is, what it enables you to do, etc., etc. So we will talk about that in a bit. But I just want us just to kind of reference back to that first episode we did about your values, and seeing that that is kind of like the foundation of anything that we do, business, life, whatever. Let's talk about our values a little bit and how that comes into play is specifically in the business aspect of what we do every single day. What is your take on that?
I mean, my take with values is that they're a tool that you can use both personally and professionally. I think when you look at organizations or companies, they have a mission statement, they have their brand values, right? So when you're thinking about it through the lens of an entrepreneur, you want to first look at your personal values, right? You want to start there and understand what matters to me. And there's so many different exercises that you can do on how to discover your values if you're not sure. Brene Brown does some really great work on values. You can do something called the VIA character strengths, which is another assessment tool I use, or something that we talked about in the first episode was this idea of peak experience. So thinking about, times in your life where you felt the most aligned and like your best self, and then extracting the values from that experience. And so through the lens of an entrepreneur, my suggestion is finding your core personal values, and then you're looking at your business, you're looking at the brand, and it's almost like a Venn diagram, right? You're going to have some ones in the middle that are similar and be like, without a doubt, I can tell you for me, growth is both a personal and professional value, right? Yes. I love that for myself, but also in my business, I'm helping people grow. And then other ones might vary depending on the type or the nature of your work, or maybe the impact you want to make. But when you can have a list of your, 5 personal core values and then your business values, it's almost like a checkpoint and a decision-making tool. So if you start to feel out of alignment, or you start to feel like your business is spinning in a direction that doesn't feel right, when you go back to your values, you can usually just realign and reassess and start to understand, okay, this is why I feel this way. These are the things I need to do to get back to me or get back to that core vision for my business.
Yeah. Yeah. And you and I, just before we hit the recording button, we were just speaking about the last time we saw each other when we did that episode, the previous episode 93, and how much has happened for either one of us throughout this time up until this point now. But do you find that for you personally, that the values that you had at the beginning when you started your business, do you feel that they've kind of evolved as well as you kind of grow personally and your business grows?
Well, that's such a good question. I think inherently, because I had done so much work on myself and knowing myself and what matters, I think for the most part, my values have stayed the same.
Yeah.
But what is interesting is I think my confidence and my ability to embrace and express the values have changed, because one of my core values is humor. And
Yeah.
sometimes I don't let that come out, right? Because I had this idea or story of what a professional person looks like. And, it's more buttoned up, and I can't have authority, or I can't be an expert if I'm, funny or silly. And so I think I've allowed myself to express those values a little bit more.
Yeah.
Another core value I have is adventure. And I think that's actually part of my secret sauce. I think in some ways I might have hidden that before, but now when I'm working with clients, a lot of times people come, they come for strategy and they want to make more money, they want to up level, but there's also part of them sometimes that just wants to have fun, right? So I think that adventurous side of me helps people say, okay, before I see you for next session, book that night away, right? Or take that canoe trip, or do those things that kind of excite you. So I think really stepping into the power of showing and sharing my values is probably what's different.
Yes. And I love how you're putting that to one side, because I think a lot of people have got this concept like, the values that I'm putting in place now won't be the values that I have later on. But it is always the fundamentals that you start with that helps you get more confident as you grow. And that's why I love you saying that. But then let's look at the opposite of that. And I'm sorry if this sounds very negative, but we do need to look at the other aspects of running a business as well. Because at any one point, you will get to a point where you feel burnout. You will start questioning the things you're doing, because maybe you're not getting the results you were expecting. And how do we as business owners navigate through imposter syndrome, navigate through burnout? Because at the same time, we want to scale our businesses, but those are always the things that come back and bite us in the butt, so to speak.
It's so true, because I think if we didn't acknowledge the hardships of being an entrepreneur or even a human in general, then we wouldn't be having this real conversation.
Yeah.
And we were talking a little bit before we started today, just this idea of, our businesses and how we feel like they're up and down and up and down, but really you're kind of up and then you plateau a little bit and then you go up. And I think there's so much judgment on ourselves, right? Our inner critic is huge. We're always trying to do more and be more. And I think what happens with both the burnout piece and the imposter syndrome, they might look different, but essentially at the core, it's often just a result of us not having the support we need, right? Putting our energy in the wrong places, not having clarity, not having, mentorship or coaching or whatever it might be to get us through those times. And I think specifically for solo founders, right? You just don't have that person, putting guideposts out for you. You don't have someone saying you're doing a great job. You don't have that 10,000 foot view. So when you're deep in that space of burnout, or when you are frozen with imposter syndrome, you get stuck. And I think that's a reason why a lot of businesses don't succeed, or a lot of women can't hit those marks that they want to in their business, because again, they just don't have that mentorship and they can't see the light through the darkness.
Yeah. And I think this is really important as well, because I've seen so many women who's already reached that stage of burnout where it's almost too late for them. And they go, gosh, I'm at burnout point, I'm freaking out. I need to do something different. But then it's almost too late at that point. So what are some of the signs that you've seen that we can consciously look out for, so that we kind of start noticing when we get to that point of burnout and start making changes before we get to that very, very, very low point?
I think there's a few things. And it's interesting even that you say that, because I have some clients who have not been able to even share that they are burnt out, right? There's this idea, whether it's kind of like that cultural reflection, whether it's a sense of failure, where I can see that they are, but they have not even embraced that concept, right? So they're still driving and still kind of burning and still working, that hamster wheel. And then they look back at this time and think, wow, I was really burnt out. Right. So even just admitting it is, or even admitting the signs are starting to happen, I think is really difficult for us, and specifically as women. But I would say, like, how it's starting to happen, or you've dipped your toes, is one area is just detachment, right? Like lethargy or detachment. Like, I'm just not that interested. You're avoiding work, right? Procrastination, even just on a baseline, right? Like, you're avoiding your work. Your heart is not in it, right? You're just thinking, I could give or take this, I could take or leave this. There's also just that exhaustion, Right.
Yeah.
And there's two different types of burnout as well, right? We're faced, I think, specifically more as women with systemic and then situational burnout. And so with systemic, it's this idea of, organizations, institutions, family maternity leave, women's pay gap, like a lot of these different things that are systemic that are contributing to our burnout that we don't have a lot of control around.
Yes.
Right. So it's that lack of control. How can I change the system? How can I change the culture? And then there's the situational, which is more often like time-based or project-based. So you might be working on something. And let's talk even the idea of scaling your business. So say you're trying to scale your business, you're trying to grow. While you're doing that work, burnout sometimes is inevitable. Right.
Yeah.
And what we tend to do is operate in the same capacity with the same thing set in place, yet this huge thing is happening to us. And we think we can just float and be the same. So when you know that you are scaling or you have a big talk coming up, self-care and support, like putting things into place and allowing yourself compassion and time off or whatever you need to recover is really the only way you're going to get through that time. Because otherwise, like you said, you're going to burn out, you're going to be deep in it. And then if you can't recover, then what happens to your business, your finances, all of those things?
Yeah. And if you don't mind me saying this, but isn't this where we need to give ourselves permission to kind of step
100%.
back
Yes.
and reflect on it?
Yes,
And do
exactly.
something that we feel will help us instead of just feeling like I've got to get through this. I've got to get through this. Just keep on going, keep on going.
Yeah, one foot in front of the other. And I think that's what we're kind of taught if you just keep hustling and you just keep going. And I think that works for a certain amount of time, but we're all human, right? We only have so much capacity. I feel like our three kind of currency that we have is, time, energy, and money. Right. And we do not have all of these things at the same time. So it's really evaluating that and seeing, okay, if I don't feel like I have a lot of time, is there a way to outsource certain things? Can I spend money on some things that would make me feel better or support me? How do I take that break? And I always think about that 10,000 foot view, right? Stepping out of my body, stepping out of my business and looking down. What do I notice? Right? What am I seeing? Okay, I'm seeing someone who is burning out. I'm seeing someone who's hustling. I'm seeing someone who's misaligned with their values. Sometimes it is really just about that break. Sometimes you need, even if it's 24 hours, right? You're taking 24 hours and you're leaving, you're checking yourself into a hotel down the street, right? It doesn't really matter. But in order for us to have space, we actually need to set a physical boundary. Especially, I think as women, we have a hard time saying no. We have a hard time. We'll let people kind of seep in. Right? Be like, oh, I'll just do that other load of laundry, or, oh, I don't mind, I'll pick the kids up early or whatever it might be. But really, you're not giving yourself that space and that clarity to reflect and just take the time to take care of yourself.
Yeah. And I know that as we're talking about this, the audience is going like, wow, this is a very heavy topic. But I think it is important for us to talk about this because, again, it's like anything, some things that we feel is so heavy, emotional, we just push it to the side because we don't want to deal with it. And I've seen so many women that get to this point of burnout or are starting with some of those feelings. So like you said, don't have the motivation anymore. I don't feel like I've got the energy. I'm feeling like, if I just say no to this and just do something else, I will feel so much better. Move to an island, do anything but this. And those are signs, those are things that we need to look into. So I want us to have this conversation. So it is there, it's open, it's verbal, but at the same time to zone in on the fact that self-care is not selfish. You can give yourself that permission to say, you know what, I'm closing my laptop now. I'm going to take the rest of the day off and I'm going to go and sit in a coffee shop.
Exactly. I know. And I think with even self-care, it's kind of become this Instagrammed version of fluff almost, right? So it's this idea of just do a face mask and just like buy this product. And it's become this whole kind of material or commercial space that it's not really taking care of our inner self, right? And I think that everyone has a different version of self-care. And I have a client who's a solo founder, and then she's also starting another company. And for her, self-care is actually connection, right? So for her to step out of her burnout or her experiences, she needs to be with people. She needs to go out and have fun. She needs to go on a date. And so when she realized that was her self-care, it's like we could name it. Okay, so what does your self-care look like for this month? How many, friend bookings do you have? How many outings do you have? And so once you can understand how that impacts you and like
Yeah.
the depth that you need in order to feel better and to feel restored, it goes way beyond just, taking 10 minutes for yourself or even a meditation, right? It's this idea of how do you just kind of like flake off and just be, right? The art of being versus the art of doing.
Yes, yes. And I think this equally walks hand in hand with the imposter syndrome, because once you start going through those phases, the imposter syndrome kicks in automatically almost. You start questioning the things because you don't have the energy to see things through. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So that on top of everything else just feel like there's just no way out. So the imposter syndrome is like peeking back alongside everything else. And this is why I feel it's so important for us to have this conversation. But then this brings me back to the positive side. So if we swing this back on its head, it's understanding and knowing that there are tools to help us with this. You do not have to go through these things on your own. You do not just have to just keep going, keep going, keep going. So I want to ask you to talk a little bit about the Enneagram. Tell us what this is. And what is it that you do using this as a tool to help people with?
Yes. So the Enneagram, it's a personality system that's 9 archetypes, and it's based on your motivation. So how it differs from some of the other personality assessments is that, say a Myers-Briggs is often those assessments are done to test your strengths. Right. So maybe, okay, you're a strong communicator, you're an introvert, you're someone who likes collaboration, those kinds of things. And it's a little bit more, I almost call it like a snapshot, an identity snapshot, maybe. So you're like, okay, these are the things of who I am or what I might do. But with the Enneagram, it measures your core motivation. So it's the why you do the things you do. So we all can be doing the same thing, but the reason behind it is different for everyone. And so why I find it such an incredible tool when working with entrepreneurs and, people and teams in general is that when you understand your motivation, it's a lot easier to align yourself, with your purpose. It's a lot easier to understand when you're out of sync, with your purpose or motivation.
Yes.
And when things get tough, you lean into your motivation and it can help you get through those hard times. So within the model itself, there's various ways that you can find out your Enneagram, and some of them are through assessments. So when I work with clients, I have an assessment that I use is quite thorough. It's, it's about 30 minutes and you end up with your type, but there's also some other ones online that you can look at as well. But each type has their own core motivation. And I'll just quickly run through what they are. And maybe you can think of, self-identifying, and you might be able to find your Enneagram type in it. So within, if you were to see it visually, it looks like a wheel almost. And so our type 1 is the perfectionist. So that's someone who's motivated to do the right thing and they want to be good in the world, and they can be quite hard on themselves. So I have some ones who are, entrepreneurs who are clients, and for them, their inner critic, that voice can be quite tough. So there's like this idea of comparison, right? So if you're a 1 and you're a perfectionist, it's really starting to like be more self-compassionate and accept, yourself as who you are. Yes. And then our second type is the helper, the considerate helper. So that's a type 2. And so they're motivated by relationships and connection. And the 2, I would say in the burnout space, is very susceptible to burnout because they are giving all the time.
Yes.
They are putting everyone's needs ahead of themselves. And so they're often outward facing. So the work for the 2, when I work with a client that's an Enneagram 2, is to take that energy that they put in the outside world and put it back into themselves.
So recharge the batteries.
Yes, exactly. And for them, they do have a belief, or some Enneagram 2s have a belief that self-care is selfish, right? So that is a thing that with the 2 that we work on. And so the next type is an Enneagram 3, which is the competitive achiever. So that's someone who values success. So everything for them is about the finish line. They want to win, and their core fear is failure. And I do see a lot of 3s in the entrepreneurial space. And I think for them, their work is really slowing down, self-compassion, connecting to their feelings, because they tend to just put the feelings on the shelf, right? And go and like, I want to win best sales, largest company, all of that. And then the next Enneagram type is a 4, and that's the intense creative. So the 4 is someone who really values being original. They're very deep, they're romantic. I don't see as many 4s in the entrepreneurial space. A lot of 4 clients are work in nonprofit because for them, meaning is very important. So if there's no meaning attached to their work, then they're just like, forget about it. They're not coming out. And then the 5 is the specialist. So they're someone who really seeks knowledge. So they're high researchers. They are boundary setters like no one else. So I always say to my clients who don't set boundaries, I'm like, read up on the Enneagram 5 and learn how to set boundaries. So they're less apt to burn out, except for they may burn out on information because they're just, seeking it so much, it makes them feel safe. And then the Enneagram 6 is a loyal skeptic. And the 6 is the person who is, let's call like the over planner, right? So they are someone who knows everything that's going to go right and everything that could go wrong before they proceed. So in the business world, they're often in risk analysis. They can be engineers. So they're really thinking in that kind of tactical, strategic planning space. I see them less maybe in the entrepreneurial world. Enneagram 7 is my type. So that's an enthusiastic visionary. Yeah. So for me, it's someone who has a vision for the future, sees the big picture, often entrepreneurial, and likes to experience all the things. And the thing that's hard for the 7, or where I see burnout in the 7, is they're doing too many things at once. Right. So constantly moving, constantly wanting more, having a really hard time settling. And that's definitely feedback I received in my life. And when I could start to name it, I was like, okay, I need to distill and kind of sit in each project and complete before starting another one. It's kind of like shiny object syndrome.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. And then we've got 2 more. The 8, the Enneagram 8 is the controller. So this is someone who feels like they need to have all the answers all the time. Their pace is incredible. They are always at the end of the finish line and they're looking back wondering, why is everyone so lazy? Really? Like, why isn't everyone up here? And I see a lot of 8s in the founder entrepreneurial world as well, just because they're so direct and they are go-getters. And so the work for the 8 is vulnerability, learning to ask for help. So 8s probably experience, the 8s and the 2s, but in a different way, the most burnout when we're looking at Enneagram types. And then the 9 is the peacemaker. So that's the 9 sort of sits on top of the Enneagram wheel, and they are someone that's motivated by harmony. So they want to keep the peace. They're really collaborative, but for them, their work is really in asserting themselves. So they might have a hard time speaking and stepping up in meetings. So they have to step out, and, their burnout almost comes in apathy. Versus like overwhelm. Yeah.
Yes.
So it's super interesting.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I love these types. Now, before I say something else, let me just ask you, do you find that the majority of the people can be in each one of these types, but there's always one more predominant? Or is it that everyone will always have just that one type that they belong to?
I think what I see is that there's usually a core type and what I would call your default type, right? Yeah. So naturally you have a tendency for this type. So when we think about my type, the 7, like my motivation is freedom, right? Yeah. So I have my own business for freedom. I make my choices based on freedom. And for me, my core fear is confinement, right? So if I feel like I'm not in choice, that's when I start to shut down and you don't want to be around me. But I've learned that, right? So I work on that. But the thing with the Enneagram that's interesting is that pulling from all the other types, it's this holistic approach, right? So I don't always just want to sit in that default space. I want to learn from the other types, right? So initially when I discovered my type a few years ago before I did my certification, the Enneagram 1, the perfectionist, like I almost found that triggering because it was so opposite of me. It was like, I felt jealous. I was like, I can't be that person. I can't be so organized. I can't be those things. And now as I've evolved, I'll say to myself in my business, how can I channel more 1? Right. So when I channel the Enneagram 1, I'm more organized, I'm more efficient, I'm more productive. And that's how I run my business, is by pulling in these other types of the Enneagram. So it's so powerful.
I know. And this is why I wanted to ask that question, because as you were going through the types, just reflecting on myself, I'm like, nope, nope, nope. Oh, nope, nope. Oh, and it's just like that same thing. Like, aren't I? Definitely yes,
Yes.
definitely no. So that's why I wanted to ask you, do you see that a person can have some of those entities, but there's always a predominant type for the
Yes.
individual?
Well, and I think that, and there are, it's interesting because I actually did a talk last night in a women's group on the Enneagram, and there were a few people there who said, really, when they took the test and they did the assessment, they were parallel almost, right? So it's like, I'm a 3 and an 8 and I can't decide. And so sometimes people might be more one tendency at work and a different one at home. And so it just comes down to asking yourself that question, like, what is my core motivation? And then understanding that you might have a lot of the other Enneagram types in you as well.
Yeah. See, that's
Yeah.
interesting that you just said that, because I just wrote down, I think I'm a 5, but I'm definitely
Ooh.
also an 8.
Ooh,
So
fun.
crossing it
Yes,
over. So
exactly.
that's where I'm going. Interesting.
Yes.
Very interesting.
Yes. And I can see that because you are very driven and you are direct, but I also see you as a knowledge seeker,
Yeah.
right? So it's interesting to see, like, I'm curious if you were to do the test, which one you would be, because I don't, try not to type people. Part of the work is, of course, like just being open-minded. And so when I work with clients, I see them, the first session we work together, I don't know their type. And then they'll do the assessment before our second session. And I would say I'm about 75% right. So there's a part of people where it's like, you don't necessarily know what people's motivations are underneath. And once you discover that, though, again, as a business owner, it can really change the way you run your business and help you identify your why, therefore preventing the burnout or maybe even preventing the imposter syndrome.
Yeah. And what you just said there, I think is super powerful, because at the same time, even if you don't know, which you don't, what people's core why is, I think a lot of people don't even know themselves what that
Exactly.
core why is. And that is very powerful just there, because we need to figure that out. And that's going to help you, again, not to get to burnout, or even if you're getting close to it, know how to work through it, but also knowing what decisions you need to make and what is more aligned with you.
Exactly.
And that's the key right there. So we all need to do a little bit of digging and work through this. But I wanted to ask you, you mentioned as well that there are 5 strategies in order to combat burnout and this imposter syndrome. And I know that we spoke about the Enneagram, and I think people love hearing about it. But I wanted to ask you about those 5 effective strategies, just to kind of, again, go back to those things that we spoke about, so people can start ticking and working through them, but knowing also that there are tools such as the Enneagram, which will help them.
Exactly. For sure.
And those things.
Yeah. And I think even before diving into those 5 strategies, which a lot of them we've covered, just wanted to touch on imposter syndrome for one moment. Just this idea of, there's an interesting, there's a woman who did a study, and her name is Dr. Valerie Young, and she has, I would say, a kind of a guide around the 5 faces of imposter syndrome. And it's fascinating because it ties into the Enneagram, and it's just interesting on how it shows up in each individual. And so I just wanted to run through those to share with you, because I think the audience might find it interesting. So she talks about the perfectionist, right? So that's someone who, will not kind of go that extra mile, will not scale their business, will not step up because they don't feel like they're perfect enough. So they're comparing. Then we have the superwoman, right? That's a woman who's can do it all, do all the things, but is, gets kind of burnt out. And so can't show up in that, that imposter syndrome comes up. I need to be everything and do everything. Yeah. Then we have that natural genius. And so you might know someone like this, where they probably did really well in school. They naturally had the answers. They knew everything. So for them to fail or be wrong it's like a core wound, right? Yeah. So they can't even step up to the plate. Then we have the soloist, and that's someone who feels like they need to do everything alone, right? So running their business in the tunnel, right? And then there's also the expert, right? So that's someone who, if I'm not 100% qualified, I'm not going to raise my prices. I'm not going to apply for that job. So I always find that work to be very interesting when you're identifying the root of your imposter syndrome, because I think once you can name it, it's a little bit easier to tame it. So I just wanted to throw that piece out there. And I think we all have images and parts of that in ourselves, but there might be one core face of imposter syndrome that you identify with. So that can kind of help you when you're taking a leap or scaling. And then when we go back to the 5 strategies around burnout, I mean, we've kind of covered them in our talk, but it's interesting that we did go deep into self-care because that's my number one is the self-care, right? And like we said, looking at self-care through the lens of you, your values, and your motivation, right? It's not just a face mask on a Sunday. It's not just a manicure. It's like what really matters to you.
Yes.
And that could be exercise. It could be travel. It could be foreign cuisine. I have a client right now taking guitar lessons, right? Like just something that helps people get out of their head and into their body and just really taking care of that whole self.
Yes.
So I would say self-care number one, then the boundaries piece, learning how to say no. Right? So with boundaries, you have to discover how you like your relationship to boundaries before you can even figure out what to do with them. Like you have to understand like what's the self-talk around boundaries, right? Because a lot of people think boundaries are mean, right? Or cruel or unkind. So when you can start to embrace that boundaries are necessary and boundaries are how we survive and thrive. So number one, what's my relationship to boundaries? And then two, what are my defaults, right? So one of the pieces of advice that I give clients is always change your default to no instead of yes.
Yes.
Right? Because we often just say yes, 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 yes. And then after we say yes, we walk away and we think, how am I going to get out of this? Right? So it's like say no first, or I need to think about it. And then you go back. And that will help with the burnout piece, right? Like that will help when you start really strategizing and saying no first and yes later. It's a game changer. And then we talked about support. That would be the third thing, right? Is really thinking about support in all levels, like thinking even about the Enneagram or thinking about strengths, like the areas of your life where I'm not talking about growing certain parts of you, like, oh, I want to be a better speaker. I want to be a better writer. Okay, fine. But there's certain things that we are just not good at. Yeah. And we are going to take like 500% of our energy to try to get better at, I don't know, like design. No, outsource, right? So thinking about the support, what can you outsource? And then also when you think about your business and your growth, like mentorship is huge, right? Who is where you want to be? How can you have those conversations? Hiring people. I mean, coaching, right? Consultants, all of those people that you need, because there is no one out there running a 6 or 7 figure business who hasn't hired someone to help them.
Yes.
And I think the sooner we can get away from that idea of I did it on my own. Yes, I think we're doing it on our own and we are hustling. I know we're working hard, but we're also seeking advice.
Yeah.
Right? Like I don't have an MBA. So can someone please tell me like certain parts of my business? Like my accountant is my everything. If I didn't have her, I don't know what I would do, right? Like we just need people, we need support. So I would say that helps with the burnout. And then the fourth thing is that self-compassion and mindset piece, right? Because without loving all of ourselves, right? Without loving like the good and the bad, whatever that might be, we don't have anything else, right? It has to start inward. And so I think when we can, which I think you were alluding to earlier, when we can give ourselves permission to pause, when we can love ourselves through our mistakes, our failures, our successes, then I think that resilience grows. And then it's that strength, right? So you can kind of like pile on top of that. And Kristen Neff is an author and psychologist who does a lot of work in the self-compassion space. And I would highly recommend her books to anyone about the art of loving yourself. And the fifth thing is core values. So that is like, to me, the foundation. Back to the values, right?
I know.
Circle. Yes, yes. If you don't know your core values, then hit pause right now and start to figure them out, because that is everything. I mean, if that is all the, it's the recipe. It is like the mantra. It's all the things that we need to do in order to live a life that is most meaningful and fulfilling.
Yeah. And I love how you're giving that through. And I think that completes everything full circle back to how we started this conversation. And, as we're sitting this through, I've got so many things that's going off in my head. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we could talk about this and we can. Okay, let's not overload everybody here. I think everybody has taken so much information in from this conversation today, and maybe even we can do another podcast episode to expand on some of these things individually a little bit. But I love how, you are mentoring and helping people work through some of these entities in order to grow personally, but also business-wise. But at the same time, knowing that there are incredible tools out there that will help us to have a better understanding of who we are as individuals. What are those core foundations, the whys, the values? And those things are the guidance systems that we need. in order to move forward with whatever decision we make in life. And I think it's powerful for us to know that they're there, they are available, and then to reach out and have a conversation with you and say, okay, I want to know what my type is. Let's do the Enneagram. I want to know what those triggers are for my burnout. How do I work through it? And yeah, I mean, why not?
Right. Exactly. Why not? And it's there. And that's the thing. And I think you just, hit the nail on the head, where it's like, there are things available to us. And I think we get overwhelmed with all the choice and everything that's out there. So my advice is always referral, right? Like, ask someone, have you worked with someone? What do they have to offer? Or just book a call with someone. So you can go to my Instagram or my website, and you can book a discovery call with me, and we'll chat for 15 minutes and talk about what your needs are, what you're looking for. Can I help you? Because it's a mutual conversation. I'm never going to work with someone I don't think I can help. Right. So just making sure, as someone, it's almost like, I think sometimes we'll do it if we're, I don't know, maybe we're renovating our house, we'll interview 3 different architects, but sometimes for ourselves, we're not doing that work. Like, interview 3 therapists, interview 3 coaches, interview 3 business mentors. Like, make sure you do the due diligence and then see who you connect with. But from the idea that the information is there, exactly. I have my, navigating burnout PDF that goes through everything we talked about today, plus a little area for you to kind of dump your thoughts and get clear. And that's available to everyone listening today.
I know, and thank you so much for making that available. So for those of you listening, the Burnout Blueprint will be available in the show notes. So go and click on that link. Ali is making that available to us. And then in addition, if you find that what she shared today was of value and you would like to take that step further, get that support that you need, talk to Ali. Her social media details are also in the show notes, as well as her website details. So my suggestion is just go and reach out. It's like we say, these things are out there. This is why we're having these conversations. Not so much for me to enjoy this conversation, because trust me, I am. Not so much for Ali just to show up and say, hey, look at me. It is about us sharing this knowledge with you guys so that you know that those tools are available out there. And if it feels right, if your gut is telling you to take a step, just reach out to Ali, download the blueprint, see what it is that you need in order to help you work through some of these elements. Because we're all human beings. It happens to all of us, but knowing that you can work through it, that's the key at the end of the day. Oh my gosh, Ali, thank you so much. Like I said, we can talk for hours, but I appreciate everything that you shared today. And I think if somebody just takes one little nugget away from this conversation, then so be it. We've done our job.
Thank you so much for having me again. Like you said, I could talk for days, for years on all of this stuff. And I admire you so much. And I am so grateful to be on your show for the second time. So thank you.
No, I appreciate it. I appreciate you for coming on, and thank you again. And thank you for all of you listening. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Go and get the blueprint, the Burnout Blueprint, and also connect with Ali if you want to learn a little bit more from her. But otherwise, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll be in touch.